Nobody understood why Simon Cowell left his judge's seat that day, until the man spoke. The studio fell into a silence so complete you could hear the hum of the stage lights. Simon Cowell, the man who had watched thousands of performances without moving, the judge who never broke protocol, suddenly stood up. Not to press the golden buzzer. Not to stop a performance. He stood because something deeper was happening, something that would change everyone in that room forever. On the stage stood a man who looked like he'd been forgotten by the world. His jacket was worn thin at the elbows. His jeans were faded and frayed. His gray beard was unkempt, his hands calloused and rough. He held a battered acoustic guitar like it was the only friend he'd ever had. And when he looked out at the audience, there was something in his eyes that didn't match his appearance, a quiet dignity that couldn't be broken by circumstance. But before we understand why Simon stood up, we need to go back. Back to the moment this man walked onto the America's Got Talent stage and changed everything. 3 hours earlier, backstage at the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles, the production team was preparing for another day of auditions. Contestants warmed up their voices, dancers stretched, magicians checked their props. The energy was electric, chaotic, hopeful. Everyone wanted their moment. Everyone believed this could be the day their life changed. Then he walked in. The homeless musician. Later identified only as Michael, didn't have the polished look of other contestants. He didn't have a team, a stylist, or even a change of clothes. He carried everything he owned in a single backpack. His guitar case was held together with duct tape. But when the production assistant asked if he was ready, he simply nodded and said, "I've been ready for 30 years. Nobody knew what he meant. Not yet. When Michael's name was called, he walked onto that stage with the kind of calm that comes from having nothing left to lose. The audience, still buzzing from the previous act, quieted down. Some whispered. A few pointed. The cameras captured it all, the judgment in people's eyes, the assumptions being made in real time. Simon Cowell leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Heidi Klum exchanged a glance with Howie Mandel. Sofia Vergara adjusted her microphone, waiting. This was routine. They'd seen thousands of people walk onto this stage. Most were forgotten within minutes. "What's your name?" Simon asked, his tone professional but detached. "Michael," the man replied. His voice was soft but steady. "And what are you going to do for us today, Michael?" Michael looked down at his guitar, then back up at the judges. "I'm going to play a song I wrote. It's called The Ones We Don't See." Simon nodded, already preparing his usual critique. But something in Michael's eyes made him pause. There was no desperation there. No plea for approval. Just truth. Michael began to play. The first notes were simple. Clean. The kind of melody that doesn't demand attention but earns it. His fingers moved across the strings with the precision of someone who had played this song 1,000 times in empty subway stations, on street corners, in shelters where nobody listened. And then he started to sing. And the entire theater stopped breathing. "We walk past them every day, faces turned away, we pretend we cannot see the ones who've lost their way. But every soul's a story, every heart's been bruised, and the ones we choose to ignore are the ones with the most to lose." The lyrics weren't flashy. They weren't designed to impress. They were honest. Raw. Real. And they hit like a freight train. In the audience, a woman began to cry. A man in the third row lowered his head. On stage, Michael sang with his eyes closed, not performing for approval, but releasing something he'd carried for too long. Simon Cowell's expression began to shift. The arms that had been crossed slowly unfolded. His jaw tightened. He leaned forward, no longer the critic, but something else entirely, a listener. Heidi covered her mouth with her hand. Howie's usual grin was gone. Sophia's eyes glistened under the stage lights. The second verse came, and Michael's voice grew stronger, more urgent. "I used to have a home, a family, a name, then life came crashing down and nothing stayed the same. But I still see the sunrise, I still feel the rain, and every day I'm breathing, I know I'm not in vain. The bridge built slowly, Michael's fingers moving faster, the melody rising. The audience was no longer sitting, they were on the edge of their seats, some standing, hands pressed to their chests. And then, something unprecedented happened. Simon Cowell stood up. Not at the end of the performance. Not during applause. In the middle of the song, Simon rose from his seat and stood there, motionless, staring at Michael as if seeing him, truly seeing him, for the first time. The cameras captured the moment. The producers backstage were stunned. Nobody had ever seen Simon do this before. Subscribe now, because what happens next is something no one in that theater, or watching at home, will ever forget. Michael finished the final chorus, his voice breaking slightly on the last line. So before you walk away, take a moment, see, the ones we choose to overlook might be the ones who set us free. The guitar's final chord rang out, vibrating through the silence. Michael opened his eyes and looked at Simon, who was still standing, his face a mixture of emotions he usually kept buried under layers of professionalism. For 5 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Then Simon did something he'd never done in the history of the show. He walked out from behind the judges' table. Heidi gasped. The audience murmured in disbelief. Producers in the control room froze, unsure whether to cut to commercial, keep rolling, or intervene. But Simon didn't care about protocol. He didn't care about the cameras. He walked across the stage, directly toward Michael. Michael stood still, guitar in hand, watching Simon approach. There was no fear in his eyes. No expectation. Just quiet acceptance. Simon stopped a few feet away. For a moment, he just looked at Michael, really looked at him. Not at the worn clothes or the weathered face, but at the man beneath it all. How long have you been homeless? Simon asked, his voice softer than anyone had ever heard it on television. 7 years, Michael replied. And you wrote that song? I did. I write every day. Music's the only thing that stayed with me when everything else left. Simon nodded slowly. He glanced back at the other judges, then at the audience, then back to Michael. Do you know why I stood up? Michael shook his head. Because you reminded me of something I forgot a long time ago. Simon's voice was steady, but there was a weight to it. I've spent my entire career judging talent. Deciding who's good enough, who deserves a chance, who should keep going and who should quit. But your song, it wasn't about talent. It was about truth. And I realize I've been so focused on finding stars that I forgot to see people. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Simon reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Michael. I don't usually do this. But I want you to have my personal number. Not because you're going through to the next round, though you are, but because I think you have something important to say, and the world needs to hear it. Michael stared at the paper, then back at Simon, his eyes welling up. Why are you doing this? Simon's answer was simple. Because kindness isn't about grand gestures. It's about seeing people. And today, you taught me, and everyone watching, that lesson. And then Simon Cowell did something nobody expected. He embraced Michael. Not a quick, polite hug, but a real one, the kind that says, I see you. You matter. The audience erupted. People were on their feet, tears streaming down their faces, applause shaking the walls. Heidi, Howie, and Sophia were all standing now, clapping not just for the performance, but for the moment, the raw, unscripted humanity of it all. Michael pulled back from the embrace, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Thank you, he whispered. Not for the opportunity. For treating me like a person. Simon nodded. You always were one. Some of us just needed a reminder. As Michael walked off stage, guitar in hand, the applause continued. But Simon stayed where he was for a moment longer, standing alone on that stage, processing what had just happened. Backstage, Michael was surrounded by crew members, all wanting to shake his hand, hear his story, offer support. But he was quiet, still holding Simon's note, still trying to understand how his life had just shifted in the span of 10 minutes. A producer approached him. "Michael, do you have a place to stay tonight?" Michael hesitated. "I usually find a shelter or—" "Not tonight," the producer interrupted gently. "Tonight you're staying at a hotel. On us. And tomorrow, we're getting you connected with resources. Simon already made some calls." Michael looked stunned. "He did?" "He did. And he wants to meet with you again before you leave." Hours later, after the cameras stopped rolling and the audience had gone home, Simon found Michael sitting alone in one of the green rooms, still holding his guitar. "You all right?" Simon asked, sitting down beside him. Michael nodded slowly. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just keep playing. Keep writing. Keep being honest. That's all the world needs from you." Michael looked at Simon, really looked at him. "Why did you really stand up? It wasn't just the song, was it?" Simon was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke, more honest than he'd ever been on camera. "My father used to tell me that success isn't measured by what you achieve, but by how you treat people when you have nothing to gain from them. I've spent my whole career forgetting that. Today, you reminded me." And that's the moment that changed Simon Cowell. Not in front of millions of viewers, but in a quiet room with a homeless musician who taught him that kindness isn't about charity. It's about seeing people as they are and treating them with dignity anyway. Share this story if you believe the world needs more moments like this. Subscribe so we can keep bringing you stories that remind us what it means to be human. Michael's audition aired 3 weeks later. Within hours, it went viral. Millions watched Simon stand up, walk across the stage, and embrace a man the world had overlooked. Comments flooded in from people who had experienced homelessness, from those who had judged too quickly, from viewers who admitted they'd walked past people like Michael 1,000 times without a second glance. The song, "The Ones We Don't See," was released as a single. It didn't top the charts, but it didn't need to. It reached the people it was meant to reach, the forgotten, the overlooked, the ones who needed to hear that their story mattered. Michael went on to the next round. He didn't win the show. But he won something far more valuable: his voice back. His dignity. His hope. Days after the audition, a video clip of Simon standing up began circulating on social media. People who'd never watched AGT were sharing it. Teachers showed it in classrooms. Therapists referenced it in sessions. It became more than a moment, it became a movement. Michael received messages from people around the world. Former homeless individuals who'd gotten back on their feet. Social workers who'd been fighting burnout. Random strangers who admitted they'd walked past someone in need that very morning, but after watching Michael's audition, they went back. One message stood out. It was from a teenager in Ohio who wrote, "I was going to give up on people. Then I saw what Simon did. If someone that famous can stop everything just to see someone, maybe there's hope for all of us." Simon framed that message in his office. Not the gold records, not the magazine covers. That letter from a kid who learned that kindness doesn't require wealth or fame. Just awareness. In the months that followed, Simon quietly funded a documentary about homelessness. He didn't announce it publicly. He didn't attach his name. He just did it. Because Michael had taught him something he'd somehow forgotten in all his years of judging talent, that humanity isn't a performance. It's a choice we make every single day. And Simon? He never forgot that day. When asked about his most memorable moment on AGT, he didn't mention viral acts or record-breaking performances. He talked about Michael. About the moment he realized that sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand up and see someone. Because that's what Michael taught everyone. Not how to perform, but how to see. That every person carries a story. And sometimes, all they need is one person to stop and say, "I see you." Simon Cowell stood up that day. And in doing so, he reminded us all, kindness isn't loud. It doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it's just standing up when everyone else stays seated.